It's time now for news from the world of agriculture on the Kansas Farm and Ranch Radio Network.
It may come as a shock for those outside of the agricultural industry that farmers have the highest rate of suicide over any occupation in the United States. Dr. Michael Roseman, who is a clinical psychologist and a farmer and has several published works on the topic, explains why agriculture is plagued by these behavioral issues.
It is clear that the occupation of farmer, rancher, anybody connected with agriculture has the highest rate of suicide of all occupations that are measured. There are some factors that we know help to explain why farmer suicide is unfortunately so common. One of the factors is that farmers engage in dangerous work that is highly stressful and often can't control the conditions that affect their livelihood. One other factor I should mention is that farmers are exposed to certain agricultural pesticides that are linked with an increased rate of suicide.
Dr. Roseman also gives a recommendation on how to help fellow farmers and ranchers with behavioral health.
I would recommend that farmers and ranchers look out for one another, and when they see someone appearing unusually forlorn or unable to enjoy anything, it is time to reach out. It's amazing how farmers and ranchers do talk with other farmers and ranchers and with others who serve them, such as veterinarians or sometimes pastors, and they're likely to talk with people who understand farming and ranching.
Stay tuned to this Kansas Farm and Ranch Radio affiliate all week for more. For Kansas Farm and Ranch Radio, I'm Sara Miles.
It's time now for news from the world of agriculture on the Kansas Farm and Ranch Radio Network.
We continue our discussion on behavioral health in the agricultural industry with Charles Griffin, who's a research assistant professor for the Kansas State University Department of Family Studies and Human Services.
I often start by referring people to the Kansas Agricultural Mediation Service. They aren't necessarily going to focus on mediation, but they're kind of a doorway into financial advising and also some legal advising that can help people kind of figure out where they are. They also know the system across the state then to start to refer people out to mental health, behavioral health providers that can be especially tuned in to farm needs.
The number for the Kansas Agricultural Mediation Service is 1-800-321-FARM. Griffin also recognizes that sometimes the best way to help is with your friends and family.
I'm reminded of a saying that it's really the answer is pretty simple, but it's not easy. And the simple answer is when you're in that kind of position yourself, or when you understand that a friend is, sometimes the most important thing you can do is listen. People turn first to their family members for help when they're getting a tough spot. But afterwards, people say, oh, boy, now looking back, I wish I would have taken the time to talk. So don't wait till it gets to that. Step in there and say, hey, can I help? What's happening? And then listen.
Again, Charles Griffin with Kansas State. This discussion will continue all week on Kansas Farm and Ranch Radio. I'm Sara Miles.
It's time now for news from the world of agriculture on the Kansas Farm and Ranch Radio Network.
Around the country, behavioral health has a negative stigma, and it might be even more so in rural areas. Joining us to talk a little bit more about this is Dr. Michael Roseman, who is a clinical psychologist and a fourth-generation farmer. Dr. Roseman says that even a simple word change can help eliminate the negative stigma around behavioral health.
Make behavioral health a more acceptable term, and to use that language instead of mental. Behavior is something that farmers and ranchers understand, especially when they work with livestock. They know about how animals behave. It is not a mystical kind of word like mental. Mental has some negative connotations. I think that term helps to eliminate some of the negative stigma about seeking assistance.
Dr. Roseman goes on to explain that farmers and ranchers being embarrassed of their behavioral health is a thing of the past.
There was a time when farmers and ranchers wouldn't even see a psychologist or behavioral health counselor in their hometown, but would visit a provider in another town. Those days have pretty much disappeared because farmers now realize that taking care of their behavioral health makes them more likely to succeed financially. It's studies like that that have demonstrated the importance of taking good care of our behavioral health.
To hear the rest of the series, head to KansasFarmAndRanchRadio.com or our Facebook page. For Kansas Farm and Ranch Radio, I'm Sara Miles.
It's time now for news from the world of agriculture on the Kansas Farm and Ranch Radio Network.
Kansas Farm and Ranch Radio has been taking an in-depth look at farmer mental health and the suicide rates across the agricultural community. Agriculture is still struggling with low prices and ever-increasing stress on producers who are trying to make ends meet. Senators Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin and Joni Ernst of Iowa have introduced a bill in Congress called the Farmers First Act, intended to address the climbing suicide rate. Wisconsin Senator Tammy Baldwin.
Well, this bipartisan Farmers First Act really helps to provide resources to the very folks who will interact with our farming community and really forces USDA and Health and Human Services to talk together and coordinate together. So as you note, this is a time of huge stress, financial stress. We've seen a lot of stress with regard to low milk prices and just a lot of other movement in the agricultural arena.
The stress is taking a toll on producers across the nation who may find it hard to ask for the help they need to get through the crisis.
We have seen an uptick in mental health crises and suicide, but oftentimes we know our farmers are proud. Our farmers may not necessarily go to see a doctor or a counselor, and so we have to have much greater coordination between USDA and Health and Human Services so that the people who are on the ground interacting with our farmers have information and resources to share.
Again, Wisconsin Senator Tammy Baldwin. If you missed any part of this series, make sure to head to KansasFarmAndRanchRadio.com and like us on Facebook. For Kansas Farm and Ranch Radio, I'm Sara Miles.